There are places in history where even the mightiest empires met their limits. Rome stretched across continents, crushing nations, enslaving millions and rewriting cultures. But there was one land they could never bend, one people they could never truly conquer. Not with armies, not with chains, and not with terror. Their resistance was not just about borders. It was about dignity, survival, and identity. What gave these people the power to stand against Rome when others fell? And why does their story still echo in today's battles against injustice? Long before Rome's legions marched across Europe, there were proud and resilient communities living far from the empire's heart. They were not rich in marble cities or golden statues, but in something far greater: unity, pride, and an unshakable bond to their land. Families worked side by side, sharing harvests and stories around firelight. Their children grew up hearing tales of resistance. Tales that said no man had the right to own another, no empire had the right to erase their identity. When word spread that Rome was coming, the same Rome that had toppled kingdoms and enslaved entire peoples, the fear was real. Everyone knew what conquest meant. Taxes so crushing that families starved, laws written to erase local traditions, and a constant threat of being reduced to nothing more than property. Yet even as fear crept in, so did determination. Leaders reminded their people who they were: not slaves, not victims, but fighters. Their survival depended on more than swords and shields. It depended on spirit. And unlike Rome, their spirit could not be broken. This is where their story begins. Not as an empire rising, but as a people refusing to fall. Rome expected conquest to be swift. The legions marched in with their shining armor, perfect formations, and arrogance built on centuries of victory. They had broken nations larger and wealthier than this one. Why should this resistance be any different? But the people knew Rome's methods well. They had seen neighbors reduced to colonies, stripped of their land, their faith, their very names. They vowed it would not happen here. Instead of waiting for battle on Rome's terms, they struck from the shadows. Every Roman advance was met with ambushes in the forests, traps in the mountains, and a determination so fierce that the legions began to falter. For every village burned, 3 more rose to resist. For every life lost, the fight only grew stronger. Yet the war was not fought only with weapons. Rome's greatest tool was always oppression. Soldiers divided the conquered by race, culture, and class, setting communities against one another. Here they tried the same. They demanded loyalty in exchange for mercy. They promised freedom to some if they betrayed others. It was a strategy designed to fracture unity. But these people refused to turn on one another. They held their ground not just as warriors, but as equals. They knew that surrender would not mean safety. It would mean the slow erasure of their existence. Still, the cost was unbearable. Families were ripped apart. Some were enslaved, marched in chains as reminders of Rome's power. Others hid in forests, living in silence. Their culture whispered in lullabies so it could not be erased. And always, the fear lingered. What if Rome eventually broke them, as it had broken so many others? The answer lay in their unshakable bond. They began to see their struggle not just as survival, but as defiance against a system that thrived on oppression. Rome might enslave bodies, but it could not enslave identity. That was their shield, their weapon, their unconquerable land. The breaking point came when Rome launched its largest campaign yet. Thousands of soldiers swept through valleys and villages, determined to crush resistance once and for all. For days, the sky filled with smoke. Entire communities were burned to ash. But even as flames consumed their homes, the people chose defiance. In the mountains, where Rome's legions struggled to climb, fighters waited. Exhausted, hungry, and unprepared for the terrain, the Romans were dragged into a battle they could not control. Every hill became a fortress. Every cave a shield. Every stone in the land itself seemed to rise against the empire. Rome, for all its wealth and power, could not conquer the spirit of those who would rather die free than live as subjects. And in that moment, history was written. Rome, the empire that had enslaved millions, was forced to retreat, not because they lacked soldiers or weapons, but because they could not crush the will of a people who refused to surrender their humanity. The land stood unconquered, but the scars, burned villages, broken families, lives lost to slavery remained. Their victory was not without cost. Yet it proved a truth the empire could never deny. Not all people can be broken. Generations later, their story still echoes. Rome eventually fell, crumbling under the weight of its own corruption and greed. But this land remained free, not because of wealth or armies, but because its people refused to let oppression define them. Their struggle is not just ancient history. It is a mirror today. Across the world, communities still fight against systems that seek to erase identity, strip dignity, and divide people by race, culture, or class. The weapons may look different, but the battle is the same. Every act of resistance, whether it's a protest, a voice raised against injustice, or a culture preserved against erasure, carries the same spirit as the land Rome could never conquer. And so, the question lingers for us. What does it mean to remain unconquered today? When faced with discrimination, oppression, or erasure, will we choose silence? Or will we carry forward the defiance of those who stood unbroken against an empire? The answer shapes not just our present, but the legacy we leave behind. The land Rome could never conquer is more than a place. It is an idea, and that idea lives on. In every fight for justice, in every voice that refuses to be silenced,